It's okay. Two T's. Despite the hype in Paris, the fact is there's no such thing as man-made climate change. Yeah, the truth is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations is a political, not a scientific body, and it even amends scientific documents before publication to conform to diplomatic niceties.
It's getting hot in here, so take off all your clothes. I am getting so hot.
The climate alarmism plastering the media and the so-called science put forward by the United Nations is fraudulent. And what Sir David Attenborough says is a disgrace to science, and we challenge him to open debate. And one thing we would ask him is, just look at this graph. The upper curve is what their UN models predict, and you can see they fail and fail and fail again to show what really is happening in the world. The world now is cooling, and our own scientific examination of solar activity shows it will cool even more rapidly in the next 20 years. When it comes to CO2 emissions, they're failing on their own terms. They're actually not cutting them, but exporting them. They closed the British steel industry to reduce CO2 in Britain, and it's regrown in India to make more CO2. This is absurd. We've lost jobs. So let's be clear, the climate change energy charges on your electricity bill are actually a poll tax on the poor, which even causes people to die in winter when they cannot foot the bill. So why is it happening? Follow the money. Huge profits have been made from carbon trading, from expensive climate change grandiose projects. Big oil benefits from price rises, banks benefit from any trading, you do not. Ice cream, tea, coffee, French baguette, we got it all here. Now is the time to start full debate in Britain on the future of the climate change story. It's a con and must be closed down. That's all for today.
And from the Piccadilly Whip ice cream stall in Tower Hill to the politically whipped here in Westminster. Piers Corbyn, welcome to the programme. Now,
Good to be here.
Surely for you to be right, nearly all the world's leaders, from the President of America to the President of China, plus most of the world's climate scientists, are engaged in a massive conspiracy to hoodwink us. That can't be right.
Well, of course, most of the climate scientists, you say, but that isn't true. Of this so-called survey of climate scientists of 12,000 papers, only 0.3% of them actually stated that they, from their work, that manned CO2 had been the cause of warming. The other papers said nothing at all, including papers
But
by
most
myself.
of the world has signed on to this. All the leaders have their own scientific advisors. Although they argue about what to do.
No, they're appointed. You see, it's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They appoint people to advise themselves. The IPCC is a political organisation, not a scientific organisation.
Why could so many people be hoodwinked, and why?
Well, it's easily done, and it has been done before. There's many things in the past which have been untrue and believed, such as, Galileo had a problem bringing forward the truth. John Harrison had a problem bringing forward the truth for 30 years about how to measure latitude. For 10 years, people didn't believe that, or believed that continental drift was impossible because of the entrenched interest groups. And if you want to know what is actually going on, we can tell you. But that graph I showed shows that the theory they put forward is not working. So under the Climate Change Act, Section 6, Part 2, it states very clearly that if the science changes, i.e. information changes, then the measures have to change and should be discussed. So what's saying is we have to reopen the debate on climate change and actually not impose these charges which are closing British steel.
But you claimed in your take there that the world is now cooling.
Yes.
But that's not borne out by either the land or the satellite temperature measurements,
It is.
it?
It is.
Not
Look at the
not
graph.
up till
Look
now.
at the graph again. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
But the past,
No,
temperatures
look
now.
at the graph. The graph you
temperatures
just
now
seen shows that.
Temperatures now are, on average, about 0.5 degrees above where they were 35 years
yeah.
ago. But people argue about
No,
a
no.
pause.
There's
but certainly
0.5
we've had-
degrees of fraud, and you can find that on the website.
But that's all the satellite measurements I know show that the temperature has
The
been right.
satellite
Now, there's an
measurements-
argument about
not the satellite measurements. So-called land measurements show an increase, but they are fraudulently chosen because they change the data sets on the way through. And you can go on the weatheraction.com website and see this, or many other.
But we've
scientific
had
papers.
since, I mean, people argue about a pause, whether that's there, how long it will last. But since,
pause, okay.
since 1997, 98, we've had some of the warmest years on
Oh,
record.
we had some very warm years, yes.
So how
But
can it be called-
the
how can it be
average,
called
average
cooling?
in the last the peak, the recent peak is the same as, taking away the data fraud, the same as the peak in the in the 1940s.
Michael, you're a bit of a skeptic.
Yes.
Your
We-
position is at the extreme end, though, of skepticism. I mean, it's really denial. It's not just There are even climate scientists who can disagree about the exact temperature consequences of CO2.
A sort of a lukewarmist position. as it
Right, but that's not yours. You're effectively in outright denial.
Well, we're saying that the CO2 has no effect whatsoever, and that is borne out by history. If you look at history, CO2 levels follow changes in temperature, not the other way round. And that is because the temperature of the sea controls the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Because the sea itself has got 50 times more CO2 in it than the atmosphere. So the sea surface temperature controls how much goes in and
Russia's deadly wildfires, the smog-filled cities and poor harvest are being seen by some environmentalists as signs of climate change. Let's now cross live to London to discuss this with Piers Corbyn. He's an astrophysicist and also founder of Weather Action. Good to have you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us live there in London. So what we are seeing here is a drastic change in climate, aren't we?
Well, climate has always been changing, but this has nothing to do with man. In fact, we predicted that there would be extreme heat in East Europe and Russia this summer. And it's caused by a certain circulation pattern. CO2 does not cause circulation patterns. What causes those is a combination of solar activity and the state of the phases of the moon.
But hang on, Piers, excuse me, just a minute. You say this isn't caused by man. How come they're reporting this heat wave is recognised as the worst in 1,000 years of recorded history in Russia? And surely
of course,
man has got something to do with this, hasn't he?
No, nothing to do with it. The only connection is man is here at the same time as the sun and the moon are doing things. You see, a very similar situation happened about 132 years ago, where there was the same sun, earth, lunar, magnetic states. There was heat waves in Russia, and there were also floods in Pakistan as now. And in the previous few years, there was also floods in the English summers, also 132 years ago. So these things are dictated by solar activity in the moon. They're nothing to do with mankind, and those who say that are just trying to make money out of carbon.
But are we not going to see this? Are we not going to see this again next year, the year on? I mean, it's only it's quite recent that
that's a very interesting question. These things do come in bursts, and we're working on that very question, those forecasts. We did say there would be a series of wet summers in England, for example, which we've had. Now, will there be a series of these very hot summers in Russia? We don't know. We have to work on that. But I assure you, it's nothing to do with carbon dioxide. And if you stop driving around Moscow, it won't affect next summer one jot.
Well, how come then so many climate change scientists disagree with you and they get so much support for what they say?
They're on a gravy train, for heaven's sake. There's trillions of pounds traded every year on carbon trading and doing silly things like building windmills, which will achieve nothing. I mean, there's money in it, and that has corrupted science.
But also, I'm sitting here in Moscow, and I think the longer I spend outside, I'm going to get carbon monoxide poisoning. That's a result of all the cars.
Indeed.
That's a result of all the cars.
Well, wait a minute. No. The carbon monoxide is coming from the peat being improperly burnt. But you see, set against this warmth, you had a very cold winter in Russia, coldest for a very long time, and right now we've got record low temperatures in the southern hemisphere, which the world state media are avoiding reporting. the average temperatures of the world are actually declining. The significant thing about the world now is not the heat in the north, although it's very significant for you, or the cold in the south so much. It's the contrast. We've got massive contrast around the world, and these are controlled by solar, lunar effects.
But a lot of people, though, Piers, just quickly, and Russia has an interest in the Arctic, of course. The Arctic is opening up. That's surely because of reduction in temperatures, and that's going to be perhaps exploited for all its resources.
Temperatures change, but they're not caused by CO2. Actually, ice is starting to increase again in the Arctic, and it has been increasing for a long time in the Antarctic. Again, it's nothing to do with CO2. Those who say that have no evidence for it. There's only evidence against.
Can I quickly ask you
a gravy train?
Okay, can I quickly ask you before we finish, does a very hot summer necessarily lead to a very cold winter? Can we expect a very harsh winter here in Russia?
Well, we don't know. We're working on that. They often do come in pairs like that. That is true, but not all the time, and then there are going to be changes in patterns. So again, we have to forecast that using our long-range process of using sun, solar magnetic and lunar effects, and we can predict things many months ahead, and we have been very successful in doing so.
Piers Corbin, as always, it's always very interesting to hear what you have to say. Thanks very much for joining us here live on RT there in London, founder of Weather Action. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Dan, you got the money. Okay.
I got a few, Bob, yeah.
Okay. You support Trump? You do?
Yep.
Okay.
I was one of the first endorsers, public endorsers of President Trump.
What are you guys going to do when our ocean level rises?
Thank you for asking that question. I have the answer.
No, let me finish.
I have the answer.
Let me finish.
Well, thank you for the question. Yeah. Okay.
For the first time on Earth, we're changing the gas.
Now you're full of shit. Sit down. I'm going to answer you. I'm going to just
Dad.
shut up and sit down.
No way.
Sit down.
No. I got to finish my question.
I'm going to answer global warming.
All right, finish the question, then answer.
It's changing on Earth, and it's changing to CO2. What do you people with the money, what are you doing about this? Because
I'm going to tell you right now.
No, I've got children. I've got 21, 23-year-old children. And what's their future with you people with money? You talk about money all of the time.
Okay. Sit down, please. Sit down, please.
What
In
are
the
you
front
doing
row.
about
Excuse me.
Earth?
In the front row. Please
About
sit down.
Earth.
Okay, you've asked your question. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to answer.
Excuse me, ma'am. Will you please sit down? Please.
Thank you.
That's okay. Please sit down. Let him answer.
Okay. In 2011, my wife and I were in Antarctica, renewing our vows. For most of you that don't know, Antarctica's on a mountaintop. Okay? And there is a $500 million facility, scientific facility there, and the scientists came to give us presentations about global warming. And they had cores of ice that they had drilled. They had drilled 4,000 or 5,000 cores, and they only brought 15 or 20. So they're going through the second or third core, and they said 275,000 years ago, this was the temperature, blah, 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 blah. And then 55,000 years ago, the world was 2 degrees warmer Celsius than it is today. This is 2011. And, stop. And he said, and I said, well, you mean the whole world? He says, yes. And the poles are only benchmarks. And I said, well, what about the things that the young woman alluded to? Okay. And he said, it's all cyclical. And although the gas may have exacerbated it, in the cosmos of time, it's not a fart in the wind. In the cosmos of time, of the 13.8 billion years that we've been on this miserable planet, it's not a fart in the wind. And as I told Joe Rogan on his show, and he said in his infinite wisdom, and Joe, if you hear this, I thank you for the opportunity of being on your show. He said, then in 25,000 years, it's most likely not going to be a problem. Now, my direct answer to your question, if that were really true, which you believe, and let's just for a moment say that it is true, that means that the best scenario vis-a-vis global warming is about 10 feet raising water. That's the best scenario over the next 40, 50 years. That's the best scenario. The worst scenario is about 100 feet. But let's just take the 10 feet. If the water on the planet is going to rise up 10 feet, that means the southern part of the United States is gone. England is gone. Most of Europe is gone. And I can go, most of Central America is gone. Okay. If that's the case, let's just take Florida, for example, which is one of the fastest growing beachfront condominiums on the planet. In the prospectus, when you invest, there should be, in the footnotes, if global warming is for real, they won't put it that way, global warming happens and water rises 10 feet, this investment you made is fuck all. Not one single investment prospectus written since 2000, this century, has alluded to global warming. Not one motherfucker. If it were really true, the banks wouldn't invest. The banks wouldn't finance. Not one motherfucking condominium. So the people that have the money, and I'm jealous of the Vice President, Gore, which Sally and I rode on a plane from South America with a few years ago. I am jealous he came up with a scam before I did. Because the financial institutions, the banks of this world know it's not going to happen. Otherwise, you couldn't get a goddamn loan in London. You know those 30, 40-year mortgages? The world will be over by then. Is Barclays Bank going to give you a motherfucking loan? With the greatest respect, ma'am, it's the greatest fraud that's been perpetrated on mankind this century.